of the Christian faith been corrupted by the scribes? I start with a preliminary question. That is, don't we have the original New Testament anymore? No, we don't. The copies would have turned to dust within 100 years, 150 years at the very most, after they'd been copied over and over and over again. They were written on papyrus, which is a fragile material. And Christians throughout the Roman Empire would go to Corinth, they'd go to Rome, they'd go to Ephesus, and they want to get copies of these books. And so they would copy those originals many times. We don't have those originals. They turned to dust. Okay, but what if all the copies we had said the same thing? Well, then at least we'd say, we think that's what the original said because they're all identical. That's what the Muslims claim about the Quran, by the way. But we don't have those either. The two closest copies that we have through the first 8 centuries of the Christian era, Codex B and Codex P75, have between 6 and 10 variants per chapter. Now, if you were to extrapolate that out over the whole New Testament, that's a couple thousand differences for the two closest manuscripts of the first 800 years. Well, we have another preliminary question, and that is, what is a textual variant? Is any place among the manuscripts in which there is variation in wording, which includes word order, omission or addition of words, even spelling differences. That's what we call a textual variant. Capitalization, that's not a variant. Punctuation, because at first, all the manuscripts were in capital letters with no spaces between the words and no punctuation. But that doesn't make them impossible to read. But that's what we have. And so these variants are of a different sort, but there are a lot of them. We have, in our Greek New Testament of today, 138,162 words. Now, don't ask me how I know that number, but I will tell you this. When my dad brought my brother and me to Chavez Ravine, the Dodger Stadium in Southern California, when I was 8 years old, we watched a doubleheader. Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale were pitching. Some of you are old enough to remember those names. And at the end of the doubleheader, my brother was all excited about how we won both games. And my dad said, "Danny, what'd you think?" I said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "What do you mean you don't know?" Did you know that there's 156,000 lights in this stadium and that 314 are out? That's what I remembered. So maybe this is why I know. How many textual variants do we have among all of our manuscripts? Well, here's a proper proportion of them. Approximately 1.5 million, if we count all the spelling differences and the variants that I've just defined. More than 10 times as many words in the New Testament. Bart Ehrman, in a rare moment, actually understated the evidence. He says we have more textual variants than we have words in the New Testament. By a lot, we do. However, here's one of the reasons that we should consider this as good news. C.S. Lewis said, the moment the miracle enters nature's realm, it obeys all our laws. Miraculous wine will intoxicate. Miraculous conception will lead to pregnancy. Inspired books will suffer all the ordinary processes of textual corruption. Miraculous bread will be digested. What he's saying is, after the text was produced by the apostles and their associates, it went into the normal routine of human fallibility in their copies. We didn't have printing presses. The Bible didn't get faxed to us or sent by email attachment from heaven. It went through centuries of copying by faithful scribes who had terrible conditions in which they worked, and they couldn't always get it right. But here's the question I want to ask in this initial part. Why are there so many variants? What do they do to our confidence in the Bible? Well, there's a lot of variants because there are a lot of manuscripts. In 1707, John Mill published a Greek New Testament 200 years after the first Greek New Testament was published by Erasmus in 1516. And John Mill was an Oxford scholar. He spent 30 years of his life examining as many Greek New Testament manuscripts as he could find, 99 of them, and early church fathers and quotations from various translations. His entire academic career was producing this huge Greek New Testament with on every single page footnotes of the differences among the manuscripts, and many times those footnotes were bigger than the page itself. 2 weeks after he published it to the day he died, which is perfect timing. When I do my magnum opus, I want to avoid all the critics. 2 weeks later, I'll die. That's fine. I don't care. But what he did riled up some conservative Protestants. They said, wait a minute. This is the work of the devil. They didn't like the fact that he's showing differences from their beloved Textus Receptus, the Greek text that stands behind the King James Bible, and no one was brave enough to come out with a different text until long after the King James was done. And yet Mill showed all these differences. And so they said, this is the work of the devil. But I want to remind you, the work of history is never the work of the devil. The work of historical investigation is necessary because we have a methodological imperative from the incarnation of the Son of God to do historical research. We should never be afraid to pursue the truth because it will always lead to him. And so Mill understood that.